Hurricane season like no other, because this season, Jackie, we know we are also in the midst of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. I'm meteorologist Chris Warren.
And I'm meteorologist Jacqui Jeras. For the next half hour, we've got the mayors of some communities and coastal areas that could be affected by hurricanes or tropical storms this season. There's certainly no strangers to tropical destruction as well as danger. And joining us from New Orleans, we have Mayor LaToya Cantrell, and from Miami-Dade, we have Carlos Giménez. I want to thank you both for joining us. Somebody's always late to the party. We're still waiting on the mayor from Houston to join us, Sylvester Turner. Hopefully he'll be able to join the conversation in just a moment.
And we want to learn how the pandemic is altering your plans to deal with hurricane season that, is, we know and have seen, is already off to a very, very fast start, and one that is expected to stay busy. So let's get right to it and that question. And how has the pandemic changed your hurricane preparation plans? We want to start in Miami-Dade. Mayor Giménez, because of the potential with something that's out there right now, PTC-9, and the threat it could pose to Florida. How is this year different?
Well, because of the pandemic, we've had to increase the space allocated to each person who may want to go into one of our shelters from about 20 square feet to about 40 square feet. We upped the number of people that we could shelter in Miami-Dade a couple of years ago after Irma, and to about 100,000. And so we got about 80 shelters that we can put people in. Obviously, the pandemic, we will have to have masks, we will have to have sanitation. The way that we even distribute food, it used to be in a cafeteria style. Now it'll have to be somewhat different. You can't have people crowded together in lines. And so those things have changed the way that we're preparing for the storm. Even our EOC, we're looking to develop, and we're developing a virtual EOC, where before we'd have, in our EOC, a lot of people in a very closed space. We've taken measures to eliminate that, so that in a certain sense there's a virtual EOC, there's spacing, and it'll be done in a different way.
And Mayor, are you confident that there will be enough safe shelters to match the need from previous evacuation orders?
Well, like I said, when Irma was heading our way, it was a monster storm, and we were looking at, we evacuated something like 600,000 people, and we had to go from maybe 40,000, a capacity of 40,000, to 100,000 in one day. We did it. And so that's the new norm now. So we will have the shelter capacity for 100,000 people, but then the COVID-19 pandemic has added the additional stressor of, now we need additional space for those 100,000 people. And so we made a lot of changes in the way that we contracted.
Okay.
We used to have the Red Cross.
Mayor, thank you very much. We are just starting this conversation. I hate to interrupt you here, but we're going to get in just a few moments to our other guests from Houston and New Orleans, the mayors, for joining us here. We'll be right back.
With parts of the Rio Grande Valley underwater after Hurricane HANNA, Red Cross officials tell us more people have been coming to shelters in recent days, and that underscores a need for emergency officials that they're discovering as they try to shelter those in need during the COVID-19 pandemic.
More volunteer help. That's really the lessons learned with almost every storm is we always need more help and need more manpower, womanpower, sweat equity into the Red Cross mission. COVID-19, specifically in the area that Hurricane HANNA hit, has decimated that community. That makes volunteering somewhat difficult. And so we're very proud of those who answered the call for the mission to help their community, but we could always use more.
And welcome back to our special coverage and our roundtable discussion now with three mayors from cities who are dealing with huge challenges right now: the threat of a tropical storm or hurricane approaching, and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, we want to thank you again so much for joining us here. Sylvester Turner, the mayor from Houston, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell, and Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Giménez. We really appreciate your time. But let's go back to what we just heard from the Red Cross there in Texas. And to you, Mayor Turner, how do you find and deal with volunteers, getting volunteers? How does that aspect of preparedness come into play?
Well, we certainly try to identify as many potential volunteers ahead of time, but we recognize it might be somewhat more challenging this time. So the plan is to supplement that with city employees. That's our goal, to utilize as many city employees we need to fill in the gap if we're not able to get volunteers. At the same time, just like Mayor Giménez indicated, we've identified a lot more shelters, and we're utilizing more faith-based facilities, and we are encouraging and seeking volunteers from many of these faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques, you name it, just to be prepared. So we want to establish as big a list as we can, and we recognize that in the course of a crisis, many of those individuals may not be available, so we just go to the second and the third line.
All right. We want to ask, the governor of Hawaii, they just went through something like this, and people did have to go into shelters. And they said the one thing that they really needed, though, was more volunteers. And a lot of these volunteers, especially after the fact, come in from places outside of the community. Mayor Cantrell, can I ask you, do you welcome volunteers from outside of your community? And if not, do you think you'll have enough?
Well, absolutely. We're a welcoming city, and if people are willing to help us, we will definitely welcome them. We did start our own Medical Reserve Corps volunteer program, and I will say within the first 24 hours of us launching that program, we had over 200 respondents, but we're up to 450 volunteers now for the pandemic, also for hurricane season. So we've married the two, and knowing very quickly that our folks will need to be boots on the ground and all hands on deck. They have gone through a series of training and are prepared to help our residents at evacuation spots, 17 throughout the city, get on buses and the like, get their N95 masks, their hand sanitizer, and ensure social distancing and the like. But we believe we're prepared.
And Mayor Cantrell, talk to us a little bit about the shelter situation. In particular, with everything that's happening with COVID, there are more people who have become homeless. There are more people who have lost their job. Do you think you have enough room to provide support for all these people, potentially?
Sure. Well, based on our registry, we have folks that are able to let us know in real time what their needs will be, so they're factored into our planning process. We have had to identify multiple additional shelters, of course, outside of the city of New Orleans, but in other areas of the state of Louisiana. We visited those shelters. We have identified the capacities that they will be able to handle, social distancing and the like. And so we do feel very much prepared to move people out of the city should an evacuation be called. We haven't had to call a mandatory evacuation in a long time, but during this pandemic, if one is called, everyone must leave.
I want to ask Miami-Dade Mayor Giménez, if someone is positive for COVID and they need to seek shelter, what should they do?
Well, they need to tell us when they come in that they're positive with COVID, and we're going to try to isolate them as best as we can. Obviously, you have a hurricane on the way, and so you have to weigh those factors. But we've taken some precautions, and I know that most of most if not all of our shelters are actually schools, and so there'll be some classrooms that will be isolated, and we can put folks that are positive there. But that is going to be a problem. We do have a lot of people here in Miami-Dade that have tested positive for COVID-19. We have a lot of people that are self-isolating. That's going to prove to be a challenge.
All right, we've got many more questions for all of you. Please stay with us. We're going to continue the conversation right after this break.
Conditions now rapidly deteriorating across the islands of the northern Caribbean, including Puerto Rico. courtesy of our potential tropical cyclone. We're about an hour away from the next advisory from the National Hurricane Center. We'll see if they have any indicators of that closed area of low pressure. Even without that, though, look at this action that we've got going across the northern islands. Widespread thunderstorm activity. Eventually, a turn towards the north is going to occur, which puts so many of us at play here for a potential tropical system, including much of the East Coast. The East Coast, Florida, the Gulf, all needs to watch this carefully.
I instituted a 14-day mandatory quarantine back in March, and our visitor count is virtually down to zero. We receive typically 30,000 visitors a day, and currently we are receiving between 1,500 and 2,000, and the majority of them are actually residents returning to the island. So we do not have a lot of visitors in the island right now, and that has been very helpful because if we had the typical complement, then we would have had hundreds of thousands of visitors here in the island.
Hawaii's governor noting one impact of the pandemic that helped his state as Hurricane Douglas roared toward the islands as this week began. Fewer tourists actually made things a little bit easier.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us, we've been having a conversation with the mayors of Houston, Miami-Dade, as well as New Orleans about the complications faced this hurricane season that is expected to be a very busy one. It already has been. And of course, COVID-19 causing all of those complications as well. Let's talk about what they were talking about there in Hawaii about visitors who are coming. So many of your cities really rely on tourism. What is your message to them during hurricane season right now? Let's start out with Mayor Turner.
Well, I think it's important for everyone, whether you're a tourist or whether you're living in our cities, to be weather aware, weather alert. Information is critically important. So I think you need to kind of make sure you're following the weather channels and your other sources of information to kind of know what the weather conditions will be, not just a few days out, but even a week to 10 days out. And then you need to govern yourself accordingly. I think it is important, especially in the midst of a pandemic, that you come prepared with your mask, gloves, sanitizers, medicine, all of the critical things you need in case you come, for example, to the city of Houston and you're having to stay with us a few days longer than you may have anticipated.
Miami-Dade Mayor Giménez, same question.
I don't think I can provide a better answer than that. That's pretty succinct. You need to be weather aware. You need to make sure that you know that there's a weather system coming. We will let you know there's a weather system coming. We try to get you out, try to get as many of our visitors out before it reaches here. But those that reach here, we make sure that they're sheltered. And again, it may be a while before you can get out. So those are very wise words from the mayor of Houston. Make sure that you have enough supplies to keep you here after the storm for a while, because you may be here longer than you think.
And now to Mayor Cantrell. New Orleans has suffered a lot from hurricane season, has survived and has been able to handle it. No two storms, of course, are the same. We can predict what the weather's going to do, but we can never exactly predict how people are going to respond. With that in mind, what is your concern going forward?
Well, I mean, the fact that the city of New Orleans has not had to call for a mandatory evacuation in many years does concern me. The complacency of the public is something that we definitely do not want to settle in, and so we are constantly before the public about hurricane season, about being prepared, even as it relates to our visitors as well. Our hospitality industry is embedded in our EOC Unified Command. And so it's getting out there in front of people and letting them know what the plans are, even in the midst of a pandemic. If an evacuation is called, everyone will be evacuated in the city of New Orleans. And we do understand that storm surge causes and faces a more immediate threat to our people than the virus itself. And so with that in mind, we'll be focusing on getting our people out of harm's way.
Mayor Turner, Mayor Cantrell, and Mayor Giménez representing Houston, New Orleans, and Miami-Dade, thank you so very much for your time, and the best of luck going forward in what is an unprecedented hurricane season.
A great conversation. We've got a lot ahead of us, and we wish the best for all those cities and everybody who could be in the line of danger. We want to remind you that now is the time to prepare if you haven't already.